there's something about understanding one side of like the yin yang, being in
Mm,
one aspect brings you into another aspect.
yeah.
And it's like through that we get to know our wholeness of both like the dark and the light aspects of who we are.
Yeah.
And so we can't just be bound by one aspect, because there's this powerful insight and definitely like literally like your sense of seeing the world is different doesn't mean, and I could speak or write about things and it might sound profound, but doesn't mean that that's embodied. It doesn't mean that
Exactly.
you're in integrity. It doesn't mean it's all the way through all of your actions,
Yes.
speech, and mind. And and I think that's so much of what, you know, is confusing along the
Yep.
path where you're like, well, insight should mean I'm completely transformed, like
Yep.
everything's done. And it's just not. That like, and I think maybe it's helpful exactly how you're putting it. Like, it's like, what's your insight and what's your pattern, your psychological, your trauma patterns, being to look at those and how they might be creating this like special little uh creature within you, because it's a very it's a potent combination to use your insight um to maybe get even more of what you're kind of like craving or needing
Absolutely.
psychologically,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're talking about with your thought, dismissing your thoughts, it could put you also in this sort of like exalted state of like, I know better
Yeah.
than other
I'm above
people.
it. I'm above my, psychology. I'm above my yeah. Like for
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right. Which again, like for both of us, it was protecting
Yeah. Of
an
course.
aspect that was too vulnerable or
Mhm.
too ashamed or too scared to be seen. Doesn't mean like we have to be perfect or we need to have all of our wounds healed or all that stuff. But like you said, it's seeing these things,
Yeah.
acknowledging them, being real about them, and being in like a mutual understanding about that, right? And being accountable to each other and me not being accountable for my part of that, for understanding like this is my wound expressing with spiritual insight, like flair, you know, and realizing like how it was creating this other sense of like identity that was hiding another shadow that I didn't have to look at.
Yeah.
If there is any rejection or denial of another side of things, that's always, like you said, it's like the finger pointing this way that you say that there's like, if you're pointing this way, there's three fingers pointing the other way. Right? Like there's always like, it's always a reflection of what you're not holding. And I found that with some non-duality teachers, I've felt like shy about sharing that I did energy work, because a lot of them haven't done that. And because it's very like, it's a kind of woo-woo-y to some people, or to some people, it's very embodied. Like for me, it was very like I could feel the energies I was working with in my body. It was a very embodied
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
And for non-dual teachers that are doing very like thought-based inquiry, which is definitely like wasn't my path, it doesn't make sense to them, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, don't do that stuff. And I heard kind of comments like that when people had asked, like, should I do energy work or
Mm-hmm.
how about
Mm-hmm.
energy healing? And I heard a couple teachers that I interacted with in the non-dual space say, like, that stuff is just like BS and it's kind of culty, because there are people out there who are kind of
For
culty.
sure.
There's culty stuff in every practice.
There's
Yeah.
two sides
Yeah.
to everything, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's why we were chatting about last time. Like, I don't really want to give anyone advice because the thing is, like, if you've never experienced energy work, if you don't know the benefits of it, of course you're going to say, like, you're going to just go by the thoughts that come to you about what you know about it and then kind of like give that answer. Um, I still to this day don't know exactly what's happening when I have done energy work. It's all kind of a mystery. But I do know that for whatever reason, like I did it for 3 years and it helped me in an extraordinary way and whatever that. And I think part of it for me was like when I hear about people's stories doing their Kundalini awakenings or even like the how the
Mm-hmm.
presence sort of embodies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my transition was a lot smoother than a lot of other folks that I know of. It seems maybe because my energy body was kind of cleared and changed over many years. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, but that's kind of like my intuitive sense of that. So it's like, I don't know, you can go a lot of different ways, but when someone's like sort of, yeah, rejecting anything, like for me in this moment of like being the lover, what I was rejecting and what was being reflected to me in that relationship, I was choosing sort of very rational people to be in relationship with because what I needed and what I was rejecting was the rationality, the discernment, that aspect of me that actually needed to take a step back
Yeah.
and analyze and see, like, bit psychoanalyze myself a bit and see, like, wait a second, this is my attachment wounds like coming up. Wait, let me look a little closer at this. This doesn't feel quite right. Also, I'm getting this sense like if I come out of feeling a bit that I'm choosing this and I kind of know I'm choosing this in a way that's actually avoiding some like hard
Mm-hmm.
decisions. Like we chatted about last time, like avoiding the grief of letting this person go, of saying like,
Yeah.
I actually don't want this. I
Yeah.
actually don't want this relationship.
Yeah.
But because it feels good or because I want to feel this way or I want to feel like I'm this kind of person, I'm going to continue. That's why I love like these like coming into oppositions as like a way to explore. Like if you're say you're very like head thought sort of based in your inquiry, then like maybe your exploration is to always kind of check in and see like where am I missing things in my feelings and emotions and body and like
Mm-hmm.
feeling to the body. And then vice versa for those who are more like feeling based and feeling into the body, coming into the discernment and the analytical and the rational without dismissing it as not being useful or not being like part of that whole human experience. So, yeah.
There's preference that is just the regular, and there's a push, rejection, defensiveness. There's emotional charge. There's a strong aversion, almost like a triggering kind of reactivity, or like this emotional investment in a particular, in being for certain modality, approach, path, tradition, or against. But either way, there is this emotional investment and charge, and it looks so important. And then that's why it's like you have this need to then go against it or impose, either go against it when someone mentions it or impose on someone else. And these to me are things to really explore, because any kind of powerful rejection or fixation is always at least in my experience, revealing something that I am fighting against, that I am repressing, that I am not looking at. So that's like so that's incredibly useful. The other thing that I noticed, that I kind of noticed that I may be even doing this myself, to be honest, maybe in some ways that I'm not even aware, possibly. Um, and I've noticed this, Sarah, multiple times, is invalidating other people's experiences. And maybe give an example. Let's say you're telling me this is how I'm experiencing life, this is how I'm experiencing reality, and you're literally talking about your experience. You're not talking about an opinion, you're not sharing an intellectual perspective. You're telling me about how you're experiencing life. And I come at you, and because I don't I have a different experience. I'm not experiencing the things this way. So therefore, I'm gonna invalidate your experience because it doesn't match mine. And for some reason, it evokes some kind of insecurity in me. Do
Mm,
you do you
because
see
it's
what I'm
not
talking
your,
about?
because you haven't had that experience, so it
So I'm
feels.
saying that I've been at the
Mm.
receiving end of this, like even just recently, I've been just literally genuinely sharing how I'm kind of experiencing a particular aspect of life or like whatever. And someone literally like came at me, like just like almost like started like arguing with me, and like, well, I know some pretty enlightened people, and I don't think that they have that kind of experience.
Ah, okay,
Do
gotcha.
you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that's
so
helpful.
again, how that invalidating looks like is going to be very different. So this is just like one example. My point is that I actually when I see this, there's part of me that's like, I wonder if it's so kind of unconscious that I might be doing this sometimes to people. You know what I mean? Like in kind of
Mm.
different ways because I've noticed that sometimes when we feel insecure or just different or whatever, then that can come up as it comes out as needing to invalidate somebody's experience or even question their experience if this is even true, right? And I think you talked. I'm kind of jumping around because I'm not really sure what my point is. But I'm just saying that this is something that I've been seeing a lot, that need to invalidate other people's experiences because we don't resonate or we cannot relate or because it's not been our experience, which is why I think you were saying how refreshing it was and kind of how good it felt to finally meet people who, when you shared your experience, they were like, oh, yeah, yeah, like they could relate to it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I think I was actually talking to some folks about how this is a much bigger thing, right? Like that's kind of like our collective is kind of up to this right
Mm,
now, right? Like
mm-hmm,
politically, religiously, spiritually, like intellectually, people are invalidating each other emotionally.
mm-hmm.
Um, and because we have different experiences. And I think this is where, like I've said, like for me, this spiritual stuff kind of the rubber has to hit the road for me. Like I have to be like, and how is this like relatable or like applicable to our
Same.
world?
Yeah.
And this is where I find it particularly relatable and applicable to our world and the fact that you're wrestling with it and this the fact that like we're all wrestling with it, that how do you hold our differences without invalidating each other, with holding empathy for each other, but not over empathizing with each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
to hold multiple truths at the same time, but at the same time, like protect your truth. So I
Mm-hmm.
think like there's so much nuance to that, but I think that's also kind of like what I was speaking to too, like coming out of like collapsing that the lover identity, especially for me, was like coming into my rationality and coming into more of this deeper sense of the analysis and the discernment, was feeling like I could actually hold both like opposites and really feel like the power of like, okay, I can hold the truth of the cold, logical side.
Mm-hmm.
And I can hold the truth of the warm, loving side. And you can hold the truth of, like a spiritual awakening that was completely thought inquiry based, and
Mm-hmm.
that can be true on its own, and a spiritual awakening that's completely of the body and being an embodiment and stuff. And I think it's tricky. I don't know, like, yeah, again, I don't know any answers to that, but I do feel like what I'm coming into is a sense that there isn't a way like where we can like validate each other while still kind of holding our own truth, right? Like at the same time that these things can be simultaneous, like just because someone else like has a different truth doesn't mean it invalidates me. But it can be tricky because like we have these wounds and insecurities that just get
Mm-hmm.
kicked
Mm-hmm.
by like hearing someone else's truth and feeling like, does that threaten like what like my sense of
Mm-hmm.
my own ground? Um and I guess that's kind of where I'm finding like the analytical mind and just astrology, is a very analytical practice in a sense. It's very nerdy. It's very like
Yeah.
intellectual in a sense, and it can be also very intuitive, but it's been one of the tools that has helped me hold those opposites, like I've said, because every part of this circular wheel of signs is an opposite to another sign. And so, can you hold the opposites? Like right now, if we're holding like the Pisces and Virgo axis of
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
chart, one's like an earth sign that's super grounded, real, you're like, kind of like, and we talked about this, just like be wanting to get your list, like the list of the 5 things that we've been humiliated by. And then there's the Pisces that's like kind of pie in the sky, like doing their thing, doesn't really
Yeah.
need to find structure. And does that, like, if you're that grounded, rational, more like to-do list person,
Mm-hmm.
does the Pisces in the world trigger you? It's kind of like a good question. Does the person who's kind of in their
Oh, big
spiritual,
time. The
yeah, so
Virgo is so triggered by Pisces and the other way around. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
right. And it's just, I think that's just an exploration then. It's like, well, what in that triggers you? I think like the times that I felt insecure, triggered, it's often the part of me that I want integrated into my life, like um when I've had friends who were amazing dancers and we'd go out dancing together and they'd just be like breaking out all these moves and being like the center of the dance circle. And I'm like kind of triggered by it because I'm like, shit, like I want to be a dancer.
Yeah.
And like there's a part of me that just like feels like that's a part of me that's expressing out in this other person's body. And like I
Mm-hmm.
want that. I want part of that too. So then like I signed up for dance like teams and dance classes and all that stuff because it's like actually maybe there's this intelligence in us that knows like we are all of that. Like we're also like while we're like the grounded, practical person, we're also kind of the dreamy space cadet at the same time. We all
Mm-hmm.
have like that capacity in us to do any of those things and we can lean into different aspects, but like denying them is like when we get fractured, and it's like really hard to find harmony and community and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
I just
yeah.
think I think the reason why I kind of brought that up because I it kind of speaks to that emotionally charged thing that has to do with like defense, rejection, pushing against, or imposing, things like that. But I think in those instances that I mentioned, it wasn't so much that I felt invalidated or anything like that. I just kind of more like looked and I was like, does this person know that they're doing it? Like to me, this was like, are they actually aware and how forcefully
Um,
they sort of come across
yeah.
about it? And I think ever since I talked to Daniel Ingram, it just stayed with me that immediately I have this like, could I possibly be doing this, but in like more subtle ways to people? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is that so? It wasn't like I felt hurt or invalidated or even upset about this. It was
Yeah.
more that I saw it as like a mechanism
Yeah.
um, that it was actually kind of impersonal. Um, but I was just interested in the mechanism alone, kind of, you know what I mean? That I was
Yeah.
like, is there maybe a part of me that's still functioning unconsciously that somehow in subtle ways invalidates people's experiences, for example, or something like that? I don't know, but I remember that I
Yeah.
had that kind of because I one of the things that in that process of dismantling of self-concept was that I am such a freedom freak, and I just want people to do what the hell they want and think what they want. And I love the variety of different perspectives and all sorts of things. But part of the discovery was actually seeing how incredibly close-minded I was,
Mm,
and how often I was so stubborn and so reactive or dismissive of certain perspectives without even exploring it deeper because like something immediately didn't resonate, so I would kind of automatically dismiss it. So that was a huge part of how even my self-concept of being this open-minded person, you know, collapsed. And I'm not saying that it wasn't, it was true to an extent. Like it wasn't entirely not true, but I saw the other side of this that I didn't see before, which is that my open mindedness usually only extended to the point at which people agreed with what I said or I agreed with them. You know what I mean? And as soon as the perspective was so different or rattling to mine that it rattled something in me, I would either reject it or, fight against it or like all sorts of things, But that I'm just I think that's what you talked about. That like there's something um that when you sort of come out of that identity and looking from that vantage only from that vantage point, so to speak, at things, then it widens that vantage point, and then looking at these mechanisms and looking at the psychology and looking at the stuff is even more fascinating. You know what I mean?
yeah.
um
Yeah. And then
to
there are always these different things that
yeah,
are there that are unconscious and like that. Yeah. I mean, I'd be interested in hearing like how the exploration goes and just seeing like
yeah,
what, because yeah, I feel like um there's different aspects of me that I'm looking at too that are unconscious that I'm exploring. And that's what when we talk about before, like, there's to me, like the unconscious is just, it's massive. Like there's so much we're unconscious of, right? And that we're
yeah,
acting out all the time. Some of it's like not problematic and some of it's not.